I've worked at the same grocery store for the last 4.5 years of my life. Of course, I've seen some pretty crazy people come in and whatnot, but this absolutely takes the cake for me. It was a regular work shift for me as a cashier, with me working short amounts of hours since I was only 16. I tended to keep the same schedule every week because I liked the days I worked, and it kept me on the ball being in school and all. Since I worked during the day on the weekends, I would usually see the same few regulars, which was not uncommon at all for me. One customer usually stood out to me, though. I never caught his name, but it was an older man, maybe in his late 60s. This same customer would come into my register lane every single week on the same day around the same times. Not only that, but he would also buy the exact same groceries every week and would make me bag them to his liking. Honestly, I never thought twice about this old man because he seemed pretty harmless and just super friendly. I was wrong. This one specific shift is where things went insanely south. I was on my register, and I see him walking over per usual, setting his things on the belt. The normal conversation and whatnot, then he asks me when I go on my break. Not only did I really not know for sure, but even if I had, I would not give that information out to this stranger. I have something for you in my car. You should come out on your break and take a look at it. I'll wait for you. Oh, I have no idea when I'll be going on break. It could be hours. That's okay. You know what? I have an even better idea. I'll get it for you and bring it in here. Now, I really did not know how to take this situation, so I notified my manager quick about the interaction and to keep an eye out for him. Lo and behold, he comes right back in 15 minutes later with a manila folder in his hands. This customer just stands right at the end of my lane and watches me for over an hour. Just standing there, waiting for me. Not making any small talk with any of the other customers or even breaking eye contact. The manager's been watching him for a while and finally pulls him aside and says it's time for him to leave. This customer explains he has something for me and instructs my supervisor to give it to me when possible. My manager says yes, of course, and he leaves. Mind you, my girlfriend is actually currently working in a separate department and is notified, and she comes over. I will never forget what I see next while I'm still cashiering. My manager and my girlfriend open up the manila folder, and the color from their faces immediately drain. I see them shuffling through tons of papers until finally my girlfriend snatches the folder and rips it in two. My manager pulls me off the register and tells me what he had left. It turns out he had written hundreds of sexual love poems for me and his deceased mother combined. This man had been obsessed with me. I felt sick to my stomach and I wanted to throw up immediately. Later on, the police come and they ask me some questions about the incident, and I give my statement and such. They eventually found him on our camera system from earlier that day, and they had enough evidence to give me the option to file a restraining order on him, as well as legally banning him from our store. The police eventually contacted him, and when they asked him to confirm what he had tried to give me, he instantly hung up after talking for some time with the cop. I haven't seen this man since, thank God, and I never plan on it. This happened a few years ago while I was living in Ontario. I'm a female. At the time I was 21. It was a very sunny afternoon day in early spring. I walked to Shoppers Drug Mart to buy something. I can't remember what it was. And as I was leaving the plaza, I saw a white middle-aged man walking toward the plaza. As we passed, he smiled at me and said hi. And being early spring, I was in a very good mood, so I smiled and said hi back. I seldom acknowledge strangers that address me, but he looked very dad-like, if that makes sense. So he seemed less threatening. I continued walking out of the plaza and turned onto Floridale Drive, a residential street. I only ever took this route if I was going to the park that's located at the other side of the street, which is where I planned to go. I lived in that area for years. It's not a main road, and it's uncommon for people to take this route. The road is narrow because of all the cars parked on the side, and there's only one sidewalk. The majority of the people I've seen are the families who live on that street. As I mentioned, it was a very sunny day. I had been walking for less than a minute when I turned around and saw that the same man was behind me. He was about 15 feet behind me, so I didn't think anything of it. I continued walking, and when I glanced down, I noticed a shadow cast from behind me. So I turned around, and the man was now 5 feet away from me. I picked up my pace and tried to rationalize. Maybe he decided against this door and is going home. To reassure myself that this was the case, I crossed onto the other side of the street with no sidewalk. I knew he would have no reason to follow me onto this side of the street. After I crossed, I waited a few seconds before I turned around, and there he was, behind me again. Again, I tried to rationalize. Maybe he lives on this side of the street. Again, to reassure myself, I crossed back to the other side of the sidewalk. If he did live on that side of the street, there would be no reason he would have to cross over again. But to my surprise, he did cross over again, still behind me. I was really panicked and decided I was going to go home instead of to the park. I didn't want him to follow me there and be able to approach me. When I got to the end of the residential street, I took a left turn and started running home. I didn't think he would continue to follow me because I had just turned onto a busier street with more cars, and it was during daylight. I turned around as I was running, and I saw this fucker running after me. I looked ahead and noticed there was a red light / no crossing ahead. I didn't want to stop at the intersection and let him catch up to me, so I took a risk and ran through traffic. When I got to the other side, I turned around and saw him standing there. He just stood there for a few seconds before he smiled and turned back around to where we just came from, and walked away. I backed away slowly, continuing to look to make sure he wasn't going to turn around and chase me. Luckily, he didn't, and I immediately ran home. I'm still not sure what he was planning to do if he caught me, but I'm happy I never found out. Okay, so I've never posted on here before, but I always read and love to comment on people's stories. Unfortunately, I quite recently had a very scary, more like terrifying encounter. For some background information, I live in a small apartment complex right outside my campus with some friends. I'm also a 20-year-old girl. So, all of my friends were always bashing on me for never meeting up with any boys or going out. I had gotten sick of it. I didn't want to be the little friend who stayed home and ate pizza while my friends were out on dates with boys. So I signed up for Plenty of Fish. Now, I'm not the type of person who would say yes to any random stranger. They had to be nice looking, they had to have plenty of photos of themselves, and we both have to have at least 2 common interests. So, with those rules in my head, I psyched myself up to join the world of online dating. Within a few days, I already had 2 boys I was talking to. One said he was a doctor, kinda hard to believe because he was 20, and one said he worked as a construction guy, easier to believe. I didn't like that the doctor guy was lying to me. But one day, as I was getting crap from my roommates, the construction guy, who we can call Dan, messaged me on a messaging app we were using and asked if I wanted to go out for a bite to eat. I told my roommates where I was going and who I was with. You know, all the things someone should know in case I got abducted. I even had a check-in time, so that when my roommate texted me if things were good, I had to say some silly code word that meant things were good. If I responded another code word, it meant help me get out of this. And if I didn't use code words, then she would call the police for help. So I quickly dolled myself up and got ready for my date. I put my hair up in a classy bun, leaving strips of it hanging down around my glasses. I put on a nice white blouse and some black pants, and I was ready to go. I jumped in my car and headed out to the restaurant where Dan had chosen. It was just out of my town, but it was still only a 15-minute drive from my apartment. I arrived at the restaurant and saw him almost immediately. He was wearing nice clothes and looked just like his photos. He was waiting just outside the restaurant doors for me. His eyes lit up when they saw me. He walked over to me and smiled. We chatted for a bit outside, since it was summer and not really cold, and then walked inside. We ate dinner and talked about our life and things like how school was going. I got the text from my friend, but since everything was all good, I sent that code word back. Dan talked about how much he liked his job and things, and altogether it was pretty nice. Except for one thing. Dan was boring. He didn't do anything exciting or really talk enthusiastic about anything. It was boring. He was an average date, and I honestly didn't care to go on any more. The next day I woke up to the feeling of my phone vibrating non-stop. I looked at it and realized it was vibrating so much that it had fallen off my dresser. I almost laughed. Then I saw all the messages were from Dan. At first, they were all saying how much fun he had and that he would really like to go out again. But then the messages took a turn. They got violent and angry, and I wasn't responding. It was 7 in the freaking morning. I was sleeping. I noped out of that situation. I texted him back and said I had been sleeping and that no, I was not going on any more dates with him. I was just about to block his profile on both sites when I got a final message. Watch your back. At first I was really creeped out, but then I thought that since I had blocked him and all my accounts were deleted, he could do nothing. Wrong. Later that day, I saw a text from a random number telling me how pretty I looked in my blue PJs. I glanced outside just in time to see none other than Dan running down my road. How the hell did he get my number? I thought warily. I blocked that number and continued what I was doing. Later that night, I fell asleep pretty early and woke up to my phone text alert going crazy. It was from the number I had just blocked earlier that day. There were dozens of messages saying how I was going to get it. I quickly showed all my roommates the messages. They all told me that I should go to the police, but since I was a stupid person, I didn't. I blocked the number again and went back to sleep, but once again I woke up to my phone buzzing. I didn't wait. I jumped in my car and drove all the way down to the police station. Once there, they told me that they couldn't do much to help me and just to block the number. I did. At least I had it on record. Nothing happened for a few days. The number stayed blocked on my phone for a while. But then the pictures started. They were pictures of my house, of me in my house, my car, my work. I went back to the police, and finally, I was able to get a restraining order against Dan. I never received any messages from Dan again after that. I now never use dating websites.